"You're not part of this family anymore," my son texted. "Move on." Two short, brutal sentences glowing brightly on my phone screen at 7 in the morning. I didn't drop the phone in shock. I didn't gasp, and I certainly didn't start sobbing into my hands. I just sat at my granite kitchen island, holding my ceramic mug, staring at the letters until the screen timed out and went completely black. My name is Anna Richardson. I am 68 years old, and for the last 12 months I had been the convenient ATM, the live-in maid, and a silent, shrinking shadow inside my own home. My son David and his wife Sarah had moved in with me under the pretense of saving up for their dream house. Slowly, relentlessly, my life had been pushed into the corners. Sarah had packed away my favorite vintage tea sets, replacing them with stark, heavy, minimalist bowls that I hated. David had casually asked me to move down into the small, cramped downstairs guest room so they could take over the master suite. I had agreed, wanting peace, wanting to be a supportive mother. But yesterday I finally found my limit and said no. They wanted me to co-sign a massive refinancing loan on my house to fund a vaguely defined startup business idea David had pitched. When I refused to put my only major asset at risk, the masks slipped. They threw a tantrum, packed their bags for a weekend trip to a luxury resort, and slammed the front door behind them. And now, this text. They expected me to panic. They expected a frantic flurry of apologetic messages begging them to come back, promising I would sign whatever they wanted just to keep the peace. That was the dynamic we had fallen into. But looking at the dark screen of my phone, a strange, cold clarity washed over my entire body. The heavy, anxious knot in my chest untangled itself. They were absolutely right. I wasn't part of their version of a family anymore. I stood up from the stool, poured my lukewarm coffee down the sink, and walked with purpose into my home office. I booted up my desktop computer. It was time to move on exactly as he suggested. My late husband had set up a joint family estate account years ago, intended as an emergency safety net for all of us. After he passed away, I generously left David's name on it, trusting him to act like a mature adult. Over the past year, however, I had noticed small, frequent, and unexplained withdrawals. An expensive dinner out here, a sudden car repair, their designer shoes for Sarah. When confronted, David always brushed it off with smooth excuses, while Sarah would roll her eyes, muttering under her breath about me being stingy and out of touch. Now they were actively trying to drain the hard-earned equity of my house. I opened the top drawer of my heavy oak desk. Inside sat the thick stack of printed refinancing documents David had left for me. He had already set up the digital portal with the bank, assuming I would just log in and click approve like a good, obedient mother. He had even left a yellow sticky note on my keyboard. Just sign it, Mom. Don't make this hard. I didn't rip the papers up in a fit of rage. I neatly filed them away in a folder. Then I opened my web browser. I logged into the bank's primary portal. I quietly removed my name from the family estate account, transferring my exact rightful portion of the funds into a private solo checking account they didn't even know existed. The remaining balance, the couple $100 David had deposited from his last paycheck, was left untouched. He could keep his own money. Next, I navigated to the mortgage lender's secure website. The application was pending, waiting for the primary homeowner's digital verification. I clicked the red button marked Withdraw Application. A prompt asked if I was absolutely sure I wanted to terminate the process. I clicked Yes. With a few simple keystrokes, their grand entitled financial plan evaporated into thin air. There were no arguments, no shouting matches, no emotional guilt trips. Just the quiet hum of my computer's cooling fan and the incredibly satisfying click of my wireless mouse. I checked my wristwatch. It was barely 8:30 in the morning. They wouldn't notice a thing until they tried to pay for their extravagant resort weekend. I closed the laptop feeling lighter than I had in years, but there was more physical work to do before they got home tomorrow. With the finances completely secured and walled off, I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. The door was shut tight. I turned the knob and pushed it open, taking a long look around. The room barely looked like mine anymore. Sarah's expensive dry clean-only clothes were strewn carelessly across my antique reading armchair. David's muddy golf clubs leaned dangerously against my pristine vanity mirror. They had taken my personal sanctuary and treated it like a messy, disrespected hotel room. I didn't feel angry. I felt incredibly efficient. I walked out to the garage, grabbed a tall stack of flattened cardboard boxes, and brought them upstairs. I didn't throw their things away, nor did I pack them with any particular care or folding techniques. I simply swept Sarah's sprawling collection of cosmetics into a medium box. I grabbed David's designer shirts off their hangers and placed them into another. I hauled the heavy boxes, one by one, down the long hallway to the small, cramped guest room they had originally exiled me to. It took 3 solid hours of steady, unbroken work. My back ached and my knees popped, but the physical exertion felt deeply therapeutic. Once all of their belongings were relocated, I stripped the large bed, washed the sheets in hot water, and remade it with my favorite floral quilted comforter, the exact one Sarah had loudly declared was hideous and outdated. Then I drove my sedan to the local hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty brass doorknob equipped with a digital keypad lock. I returned home, grabbed my dusty toolbox from the garage, and efficiently swapped out the standard lock on the master bedroom door. I programmed a complex numerical code that only I knew. I closed the door and tested it twice. The lock clicked into place with a solid, reassuring, and permanent thud. I had surrendered my own space to avoid conflict, thinking it was the loving maternal thing to do. But love shouldn't require shrinking yourself until you disappear in your own house. As I carried my own clothes back into my spacious closet, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was David. I glanced at the glowing screen. Card declined at the restaurant. Did you do something? I calmly turned the phone completely off and slipped it into my pocket. I spent the rest of the afternoon deep cleaning the house. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until they shined, reorganized my vintage plates back into the primary cabinets, and threw away the expired, half-eaten specialty foods Sarah had hoarded in the refrigerator. By early evening, the house smelled of lemon polish and felt entirely mine again. At exactly 6 o'clock, the front door slammed open, vibrating the walls. Heavy, furious footsteps pounded against the hardwood floor. "Mom!" David's voice echoed through the hallway, thick with frustration and entitlement. I remained seated comfortably in the living room, calmly reading my hardcover novel. David and Sarah marched in. Sarah's face was flushed dark red, her designer sunglasses pushed aggressively up on her forehead. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" Sarah demanded, dropping her leather overnight bags onto the floor. "We had to call my dad to pay for the hotel bill. You locked the estate account." "I removed my portion." I corrected her softly, not looking up from my page. "And I canceled the refinancing application." David stared at me, his jaw slacking in disbelief. "You what, Mom? We needed that money. We already signed preliminary contracts for the business space. You signed contracts using money you didn't have." I replied smoothly, marking my page with a tassel and finally closing the book. "You texted me to move on. I did exactly that." "This is absolutely ridiculous," Sarah scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. "You can't just cut us off. We live here." She turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, clearly intending to retreat to the master bedroom and slam the door in my face. A moment later, I heard the metallic rattle of the new doorknob, followed by a sharp, echoing gasp. "David! She locked us out!" Sarah shrieked loudly from the upstairs landing. David rushed up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I stayed perfectly still on the couch. A few minutes later, he came back down, looking more deeply confused than angry. "You moved our stuff into the tiny room." "That's your room now," I said. "If you choose to stay." Sarah marched back down, aggressively clutching her smartphone. "Fine. Two can play at this game. I'm going to work from home tomorrow and use all the internet bandwidth until you fix this mess." I just offered a small, polite smile. 5 minutes later, the main router in the hallway powered down completely. I had called the internet provider earlier that afternoon and switched my daily service to a personal password-protected hotspot on my phone. The next morning, the harsh reality of their new situation began to firmly set in. Without the shared high-speed Wi-Fi, Sarah was forced to use her limited spotty cellular data to join her morning corporate video calls. The connection kept freezing and dropping, and I could hear her loud, frustrated sighs echoing all the way from the small guest room. I made myself a quiet, peaceful breakfast: scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and a fresh cup of black coffee. When David finally shuffled into the kitchen, his hair messy and his eyes tired, he automatically reached for the premium espresso beans Sarah usually insisted on having. The glass jar was completely empty. "Where's the coffee?" he mumbled, opening the pantry and scanning the shelves. "I didn't buy any," I answered, wiping down my frying pan. "I only bought enough regular grounds for myself." He stopped and looked at me, genuinely bewildered by the concept. For a solid year, I had paid for every single grocery run, every streaming service, and every utility bill. They had treated my bank account like a magic well that never ran dry. "Mom, come on," he groaned, rubbing his face tiredly. "Are you really going to act like a child over one stupid text message?" I carefully dried my hands on a cotton towel and turned to face him directly. "I'm not acting like a child, David. I'm acting like a homeowner. You are 32 years old. You want to be independent and make the rules. Be independent. Buy your own coffee. Pay your own bills." Sarah walked into the kitchen, catching the very end of the conversation. She glared at me, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen aggressively. "Fine. I'll just order premium groceries for delivery. We don't need your help." An hour later, the delivery driver arrived. Sarah smirked triumphantly as she carried the brown paper bags in, aggressively unpacking them onto my clean counter. She had bought expensive imported cheeses, organic meats, and flavored waters. I didn't say a word to stop her. I simply pointed to the lowest, smallest shelf of the refrigerator. "Keep your items on the bottom shelf. The rest of the space is mine." She rolled her eyes dramatically, but she shoved her items in. What she didn't know yet was that her personal credit card balance was already nearing its maximum limit without my account there to conveniently pay it off at the end of the month. By Wednesday, the tension hanging in the house was a physical weight, but for the very first time, it wasn't resting squarely on my shoulders. I maintained my daily routine without interruption. I gardened in the backyard, I read my books in the sunroom, and I went for long evening walks. I locked the master bedroom every single time I stepped out of it. David and Sarah were quickly realizing that full independence was incredibly expensive. On Thursday afternoon, I was sitting quietly on the back patio when David approached. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He didn't have his usual confident, entitled swagger. "Mom!" He started, his voice lowered so Sarah wouldn't hear him through the open kitchen window. "I need a favor, just a really small one." I placed my gardening trowel down on the table. "I'm listening." "My truck lease payment bounced," he admitted, looking down at the patio stones. "The leasing company called. I just need a bridge loan until next month. I'll pay you back, I swear." 6 months ago, I would have rushed inside to find my checkbook. I would have felt the familiar crushing spike of maternal anxiety, the desperate need to fix his problems so he wouldn't be stressed. Now, sitting in the afternoon sun, I just felt a profound, unshakable sense of calm. "No," I said simply. He blinked, taken aback. "No, Mom, I need that truck for work." "Then you should have prioritized the lease payment instead of spending the weekend at a luxury resort," I replied evenly. "I'm not fixing this, David. You're doing this just to punish us." He raised his voice slightly, the familiar victim mentality kicking into gear. "You're trying to ruin my life because you're holding a grudge. I'm not doing anything." I corrected him, standing up and casually brushing the dirt off my denim knees. "I'm simply stepping back. The consequences you're facing right now are entirely your own creation." I picked up my gardening tools and walked right past him into the house. I didn't look back to see his reaction. I didn't need to. The boundary was finally set, and it was made of solid steel. Friday morning brought the exact climax they hadn't bothered to prepare for. I was standing in the kitchen sipping my morning tea when I heard the distinct, heavy rumble of a large diesel engine idling in my driveway. I glanced out the front window. A flatbed tow truck was parked right behind David's shiny, oversized pickup. The driver was already out of the cab, efficiently attaching heavy metal chains to the front axle. Panic erupted upstairs. Footsteps thundered down the wooden staircase, and David burst through the front door, still wearing his sleep sweatpants. "Hey, stop! What are you doing?" he yelled, running barefoot down the concrete driveway. I stepped out onto the porch, wrapping my cardigan tighter around my shoulders against the crisp morning chill. The tow truck driver didn't even pause his work. He just pulled a clipboard from his belt and handed it toward David. "Repo order, buddy. 3 months past due. Sign here to acknowledge I'm taking the vehicle." David stood completely frozen, staring at the yellow paper. Sarah ran out next, clutching her silk robe. When she saw the massive truck being hoisted up onto the slanted flatbed, she turned on David instantly. "What is happening? You told me you paid that lease." "I thought the auto pay was still linked to Mom's checking account." David stammered, his face turning a sickly pale color. Sarah whipped her head toward me, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated fury. "You did this? You just stood there and let them take his truck." I leaned comfortably against the wooden porch railing, completely unaffected by her explosive anger. "I stopped paying his bills, Sarah. If you two didn't bother to check your own finances, that's a massive failure of adult responsibility, not a mother's betrayal." The tow truck driver loudly secured the chains, climbed back into his cab, and drove away, taking their primary mode of transportation down the quiet suburban street. David sank down onto the front concrete steps, holding his head in his hands. Sarah didn't comfort him. She glared at him in utter disgust, turned around, and marched back inside the house. The united front they had used to bully me for a year was officially broken. The weekend was a masterclass in silent, inevitable collapse. With no truck, David was forced to ask Sarah to borrow her small sedan. She flatly refused, claiming she desperately needed it to run errands, though I knew she mostly just drove to local coffee shops to use their free Wi-Fi since she had none at home. The argument started behind the closed, thin door of the downstairs guest room. At first, they were hushed, aggressive whispers. Soon, they escalated into full-blown, door-rattling shouting matches. I didn't intervene. I didn't knock on the door and offer to mediate their marital issues. I simply put in my wireless earbuds, played some soothing classical music, and went about my day undisturbed. On Sunday evening, the breaking point finally arrived. I was calmly wiping down the kitchen counters when Sarah came stomping downstairs, lugging 2 heavy suitcases behind her. She didn't even look at me. She marched straight to the front door, her face set in a hard, incredibly bitter line. David was right behind her, pleading desperately. "Sarah, come on. Just give me a week to sort this out. We can figure it out." "Figure what out?" she snapped sharply, turning to face him with a look of pure contempt. "You have absolutely no money. The business plan is dead because your mother won't play along and I refuse to live in a tiny box room with no internet and no future. It's just a rough patch, David insisted, reaching out for her arm. She pulled away sharply, swatting his hand down. I didn't sign up to struggle, David. Call me when you act like an actual man and get your life together. She yanked the front door open, dragged her bags to her car, and drove off without a single backward glance. David stood in the open doorway, watching her red taillights disappear down the darkening street. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy, thick, with the sudden realization of everything he had lost in a matter of days. He slowly turned and looked at me. I stood perfectly still, holding my cleaning cloth. He didn't say a word. He just walked past me, his shoulders slumped, completely defeated. By Wednesday, David was nothing more than a ghost in the house. He barely left the small guest room, and his loud arrogance was completely erased. I didn't feel triumph, nor did I feel a shred of pity. I just felt incredibly practical. That afternoon, I found him sitting alone at the kitchen island, staring blankly at his phone. I walked over quietly and placed a large, empty cardboard box on the granite counter right next to him. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "What's this?" "It's time, David," I said gently, but with zero hesitation. "You have until Sunday morning to find a room to rent a friend's couch or a cheap apartment." He let out a shaky breath, his tough exterior finally dropping. "Mom, please. Sarah left me. I have nothing. I'm sorry about the text. Just let me stay. I'll pay rent. You don't have money for rent." I stated simply, not as an insult, just a fact. And this isn't just about money. It's about respect. You told me I wasn't part of your family. You wanted my assets, but not me. "I didn't mean it," he whispered. "It doesn't matter," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "What matters is that I listen to you. My boundaries are no longer negotiable." Sunday, David. Leave the key on the counter. I didn't wait for him to beg. I turned and walked into my sunroom, leaving him alone with the empty box. There would be no more second chances and no more safety nets. Sunday morning arrived with a quiet drizzle. I stayed upstairs in my locked bedroom until I heard the heavy final thud of the front door closing. I waited 5 minutes in the silence, then walked downstairs. The house was completely still. On the kitchen island, resting neatly next to the fruit bowl, was a single silver house key. I peeked into the small guest room. It was empty, the bed stripped bare. He had packed his things in the night, avoiding a final confrontation. He finally knew there was nothing left to say. I dropped the key into a utility drawer and walked through my home, opening the blinds to let the fresh morning air in. For a year, I had felt like an unwanted trespasser, swallowing my dignity just to keep a toxic peace. Now, the space belonged entirely to me again. I didn't hate my son, and I genuinely hoped he would eventually learn to stand on his own 2 feet. But my job of raising him was officially done. I went to the pantry, ground my favorite premium coffee beans, and started the machine. The rich aroma filled the clean kitchen instantly. Pouring a hot cup, I walked out to the back patio and sat in my rocking chair. I didn't need to check my bank accounts out of fear, and I didn't need to shrink myself anymore. I took a slow, deep sip. My life was finally entirely my own.